A few more between that. And then the 20XX revolutions, the world revolution that we are now. So it's rebellions against neoliberal globalization and the neocon imperial project of the US. So especially with this one and with a lot of the revolutions in general, they tend to be focused more on people outside of institutional power or sort of grassroots people going up against the system. So as it is now, and as we'll talk about, it's more organizers and activists. These don't necessarily come from government spaces, but they come sort of from below, and once people are fed up enough with whatever current system, that's when these revolutions will begin and continue. So we're looking at environmentalism and the climate justice movement in the current world revolution, and looking at it in a historical perspective. So looking at how environmental activists are now, and then comparing that to sort of a broader system of movements within the network. So as you can see, yeah, like I mentioned, anti-systemic network movements, these are movements that are generally going against whatever normative things are happening. So with the neoconservative project or neoliberalism now, a lot of these new left movements are sort of going against that. So in the world historical perspective, so environmentalism in the early days in the 19th and 20th century, it was more focused on preservation and conservation of the environment itself, so more about preserving land, more about keeping like the actual environment protected and leaving spaces for that. So this is around the time we have to begin the development of national parks and setting aside land just purely for intrinsic value of the land itself. There was not really an environmental consciousness much at this time. So while research has linked the rise of the current environmentalist movement to like materialist values associated with economic development, it shows that there's a lot of support for it in the global south, and there's a lot of indigenous and other people that are not necessarily involved in that materialistic culture. They're also very interested in environmental issues. So climate justice has emerged as one of the central players in the current world revolution. And there's a split between modernizing reformists and treadmill of production radicals, which we'll talk about when we go into the actual data sets. So environmentalists have participated in the social forum process, and we'll talk about the role of social forum a bit and what that is, where the data comes from, at the global, national, and local level. And there's touches of environmentalism in almost every movement now, so we'll talk about the overlap then, but environmentalism is a very central player, and it's very key in the network of broader social movements globally.
So now we're going to get into our study. For the study, we use survey data. Just a little bit about the survey. It was conducted at 4 social forum meetings, 2 World Social Forums and 2 U.S. Social Forums. The World Social Forums were Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2005, and Nairobi, Kenya in 2007. And the U.S. Social Forums were Atlanta, Georgia in 2007, and Detroit in 2010. The surveys were administered in different languages to match the demographics that attended the meetings. So for example, in Brazil, administered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. In Kenya, it was administered in English, Spanish, French, Swahili, and Portuguese. And then in the United States, it was English and Spanish. So the survey includes questions regarding demographic characteristics, the levels of activism. So for example, questions like, in the past 12 months, how many public protests or demonstrations did you participate in? And in what year did you participate in protests or demonstrations? Political attitudes, so their views on capitalism, the IMF, the UN, etc. And then their active involvement in or identification in various social movements that we discussed. So the methods we use, this was a 2-part study. The first part focused on crosstab data, comparing and contrasting environmentalists or actively involved environmentalists with other activists who were actively involved in other movements, but environmentalism, and other participants who were not actively involved in any movement. And to reduce or to minimize correlation, we removed individuals who weren't actively involved in environmentalism, but also who identified with the environmentalist movement, or strongly identified with it. This was just to make this correlation of political attitudes and stuff like that. So for the second part of the study, we did network analysis using UCINet. We conducted the two-way affiliation matrix, looking at centrality of environmentalist movement in the larger network of movements, and also the, how important is environmentalist movement in the overall cohesion of the network. So, and then we also did an egocentric network to see which movements are within environmentalist immediate network. So getting to the data, you can see that there's a big drop-off between those who strongly identify with environmentalists and those who are actually actively involved in environmentalism. So about almost half of people that we studied strongly identify with environmentalists, but only about a quarter of them are actually involved in environmentalism. This is the end of our data. So we have about 2,000 participants, and roughly consistent throughout. It's about 500 and 550 participants each survey. So getting to a comparison between environmentalists and other activists and non-activists, we focused for this presentation just on race. So you can see that environmentalists are more white than other activists, and they're also less black and less Latino or Latina. Though these differences weren't significant using Z-scores. So now we get to questions on political attitudes. So I have the questions on top, so they're easier to read. So do you think we need to reform capitalism or abolish it? In this case, environmentalists are more likely to want to reform capitalism and less likely to want to abolish or replace it. So in this sense, they're they're less radical than other activists. And this is a trend that we see throughout the rest of the political attitudes also. And again, these differences were not significant. So in the long run, what do you think should be done about certain institutions? We asked about the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, and other institutions. We focus just right now on the World Bank. So you can see again that they're more likely to want to reform the World Bank as opposed to abolish it or replace it. But again, these statistics weren't significant. So do you think that a democratic world government is a good or a bad idea? There seems to be a split here where about 39.1% view it as being a good idea, plausible. 33% view it as being a good idea but not plausible, and about 20% view it as being just a bad idea. So this split is going back to the previous slides also. You can see that there's a major split between the radicals and the moderates. It's pretty evenly split throughout. Same trends are seen amongst other activists also. So out of the following, which level is most important for solving major contemporary issues? We find that environmentalists are more localist than other activists and other non-activists. But again, there's a pretty large minority who are more globalists. So do you consider yourself to be part of the larger global social movement? And this was the only statistic that we found, the only comparison we found that was statistically significant. So they are more likely to identify as part of the larger global social movement, which we found to be contradictory to their localist predisposition. So to summarize the comparisons, we find that they're predominantly white, more so than other activists. They're predominantly localist, but also identify with the larger global social movement. And they tend to be less radical than other activists, but they're pretty split on important issues. But overall, they share the same characteristics generally to other activists and non-activists. So we suggest that this lack of significant differences between environmentalists and other activists might be due to how integrated they are. They might be highly integrated within the overall network. So for the next part of the study, we conducted a network analysis to find out how central environmentalism is within the larger network, and also how important they are to the overall cohesiveness of the network. So obviously you're not going to be able to read that chart, but we first conducted an affiliation matrix just to look at the number of overlaps between participants who are environmentalists and also actively involved in other movements. So I've made it a little bit easier for you guys to read. So we split the percentages, we looked at both directions. So how many activists or other movements are actively involved in environmentalism, and how many environmentalists are actively involved in other movements. So this is looking at the first case, so other activists who are actively involved in environmentalism. And we see these percentages are rather high, which suggests that environmentalists are pretty prominent within most movements. Even the lowest movements still hold at least a third of the activists in other movements. In this case, we're looking at how actively involved environmentalists are involved in other movements. We find that the movements change. So here we have human rights, fair trade, peace, and anti-racism at the top. So these movements we suggest are the most important movements to environmentalists. But open source, where they were the highest degree of overlap here, they're actually the lowest degree of overlap here. We think this is because certain movements like open source, autonomism, communism, they have low sample sizes. They don't have a lot of participants, so that might affect the percentages of overlaps. So here's a diagram of the network, the whole network of all 27 movements. We took out Porto Alegre because this survey only, I think it only analyzed 18 movements and not 27. So, but previous research has shown that examining the networks of every forum shows the same consistent structure of the network overall. So it doesn't make much of a difference statistically. So we see environmentalism is right here in the middle with, I can't even read the other ones, but human rights is also in there, and anti-racism and fair trade and peace movement, the feminist movement are all highly centralized, and they're all pretty strongly tied to the environmentalist movement. And also here's the ecocentric network, you can see a little bit better. So from what you can take away from this is environmentalist movement has a pretty large ecocentric network. I think there's about 13 or 14 movements that are strongly connected to the environmentalist movement. So next we measure network centrality, so how central environmentalism is in the overall network, and we use the eigenvector centrality, which measures the centrality of a specific movement as determined by the centrality of other movements it's connected to. So if environmentalism is connected to another movement that is also highly central, then it's going to increase the centrality of environmentalism, as opposed to if it was connected to movements that were more peripheral in the overall network, it would reduce the centrality of the network, of environmentalism overall. So we find that environmentalism ranks in the top 5 of the most central movements in the whole network. Below human rights, anti-racism, peace, and fair trade. The standard deviation right here is pretty low, which suggests that there isn't much of a deviation between the most central movements. They're all pretty equally centralized. Though this statistic, which I'm still trying to figure out what it actually means, it suggests that the overall network isn't very centralized overall. So if we have a network that isn't very centralized and you're looking at the centrality of a particular movement, it may bring out different it may suggest something different than what we're looking for. So we decided to look at network cohesion also. So how important is environmentalism to the overall cohesiveness of the whole network? So we use lambda grouping for this process, which measures the minimum number of edges that can be deleted before the node is no longer connected to the larger network. So basically, the greater number of ties that environmentalism has with other networks, the more important it will be to the overall cohesiveness of the overall network. And we see that environmentalism ranks among the top, along with the feminist movement, anti-racism, fair trade, human rights, at 13 ties, with the largest number is 14 ties. And here's another diagram, just another way of representing the data. So some of the lowest ranking movements are anarchism, communism, national liberation, autonomism, and the highest movements are right in this area. So environmentalism, the peace movement, feminists, anti-racism. So just to summarize the network analysis, the overall these results show that the environmentalist movement is well embedded in the whole network of movements. We're still trying to understand, like I said, what the statistic on the overall network means. So what does it mean to be centralized in a decentralized network? So here's the conclusion. I'll let you go ahead.
So preeminent crisis produced by global capitalism is anthropogenic climate change. So the rate at which, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with climate change, but the rate at which climate change is happening is being affected by human interaction. So the increased centrality of environmentalism and the climate justice movement is likely a response to this. So as it's recognized that humans are impacting the environment and how much is becoming increasingly more important that people are sort of responding to that. And so that accounts for some of the centrality of environmentalism in the new network of movements. And as I mentioned, early environmentalism didn't really have a focus so much on people. So very early environmentalism, especially in the US, you had preservationists who wanted to really keep land just for the value of the land and keep it pristine. And conservationists who wanted to keep the land but for its use value, so to be able to hunt and trap and logging and do things like that. And the shift in the past, I'd say 30 or so years, has been towards more focusing on the way that people are actually impacted by environmental change. So Robert Bullard, who is a sociologist in Texas Southern University, I believe, sort of coined the term environmental racism, and that connects to climate justice, the way in which the emphasis is now on trying to make life better for people who are negatively affected by environmental impacts and help mitigate the impacts of the environment on the people, while also like helping on the environment as well. So I mean, yeah, pretty much that. The high embeddedness of this movement in the larger make it a potential unifying force. So as I mentioned, you have, there's a high degree of overlap between indigenous rights movements, between anti-racism, between peace movements, human rights movements as well. So things like the Dakota Access Pipeline, as much as it is an environmental concern and it will affect the water in that area, it's also about indigenous rights, the rights of the people to their land, as well as just it's a human rights issue. Like issues like this, recognizing environmental racism and the way in which certain communities don't have necessarily the power or the access to be able to combat environmental issues, and how those end up getting put off on people that have either less political or less economic power or means to be able to combat those issues, has had a real greater emphasis. So the degree of overlap between environmental movement, human rights, and anti-racism create situations like Dakota where you have indigenous peoples and indigenous rights activists, but as well as just environmentalists more broadly and people who care about indigenous rights and human rights and anti-racism. These are pipelines that are misdirected out of wealthier white neighborhoods and going through land that is people who are just people of color, and especially in this specific situation, indigenous people. So there's been a shift and it's continuing towards that. There's a lot more emphasis on people. Things like the Paris Accords and other big movements are really focusing on the way in which very wealthy industrialized countries, Western countries, are having an impact that is overbearing on smaller countries, and smaller nations are probably likely to be more affected just by having less, by contributing less to the problem of climate change. They're more likely to be infected first and more by the effects of climate change. So the climate justice movement now is not so much about how we can preserve the environment or so much just fill the hole in the ozone layer, but how we can, for the people that are already going to be affected by those changes, how we can really make sure that they're taken care of and have a way to be able to deal with this as sea levels rise and all the other horrible effects that happen. Not just protecting the environment, protecting the people from the environment and from the environment that's changed because of people. Yeah, that's it. Oh yeah, we're any questions?
Oh yeah. So first off, that was fascinating, and I was very interested in seeing all these broader connections that you guys were talking about. I did have one question in terms of some of the survey results, and I think you said it was statistically insignificant, but nonetheless, I'm interested. That you said that there might be a contradiction in terms of environmentalists saying that they are part of a global social movement, yet at the same time they are more localist, right? Like they're more localized. But at the same time, as soon as you said that, I thought of that classic bumper sticker, think global, act global.
Yeah.
So I mean,
It might not be a contradiction, yeah. Intuitively, it seems like a contradiction, but again, we gotta look into the literature and see if there is. It may not be, as we're putting it. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question about calling this revolution because, from my understanding, that would be a systemic upheaval, right? Overhaul, a change, a drastic
What? I'm
change
sorry.
of the system.
A revolution?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and you said specifically in your presentation that this is not something that they want to go changing the system. They want to modify it, but they don't want to overhaul it or replace it. So I was just curious about that. Like, are you thinking this is a burgeoning revolution? Like something is going to change because of their connections with the war movement and the civil rights movements and all the other movements, and it's going to become a revolution? Or what is your thinking on the choice of wording of that?
Yeah, so we're sort of contextualizing it in the current world revolution. So when you look at stuff like the Arab Spring, and there's just a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement, even here, the Arab Spring, things that have happened that's why we call it the 20XX, because it's still sort of happening. So we contextualize it in sort of the framework of a global revolution happening, but necessarily the environmentalists themselves aren't all revolutionaries. It's just in the broader network of a lot of movements that are starting from the bottom, trying to overthrow like systems like that. And there's a lot of environmental influence and in touch on a lot of those different revolutions that are happening. So
Thinking of it as a system, breaking the system, so they're all interconnected. And so it's not about environmentalism being a revolution, it's about...
Yeah. A global revolution is defined, I think, as a constellation of movements that create meaningful change in the global system. So this is one particular movement theme within the larger revolution.
That is.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I just have a small question. On your introduction, you mentioned that of all AI environmentalists, 19.4% were from Brazil. What does that mean, and where did you get the figure from?
Sorry.
It said on one of the slides, 19.4% of AI environmentalists are from Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean, and where is the figure
I'm
from?
sorry. It's actively, it means actively involved in environmentalism.
Okay.
So research previously shows that environmentalism is predominantly evolved from this new ideology, the new global left, which coming from primarily westernized culture. But we're showing that there's actually a large environmentalist push in the global south too. So that was just an example of the percentage of environmentalists within the global south.
Where did the data come from? How was it gathered?
Oh, it was part of the survey. It was the participants that participate in the World Social Forum. So of the
So part of your study?
yeah, part of our study.
Okay.
So of the environmentalists within the larger sample, 90% were from Brazil.
Okay.
No more? Speak now, or hold your peace. Thank you guys. I'm the last presentation for this particular session, and my presentation is significantly different than the predecessors of the session in that I'm filling space. I decided to chair 2 sessions, and the call went out for presenters, And in lieu of canceling sessions, I volunteered to present. But I'm just kind of pulling together previous things that I've worked on and not doing original research. So you'll have to forgive me in that regard. I don't have my methodology and everything else to present to you in the same manner that they did. I teach at College of the Canyons. I'm an adjunct instructor there in the sociology department. And I actually worked on collecting this information as a graduate student myself. So, but again, it's not original research. This topic here is atheism, and it's looking at the fact that atheists are a growing population, and it may or may not be that they're growing so much as they're verbalizing that they're growing, or it may be that they're growing. I'm not sure. And I started out very basic with my presentation in discussing what is atheism. And the next slide is really about what is not. But first, atheism is a belief that God does not exist. You have atheists that will flat out tell you it's not true, there is no God, or that you have not yet convinced them that there's enough evidence supported by facts and data to support that there is one. Okay, so an atheist is composed of the word atheist, which is non-theist. So they don't have the belief. And here's what atheist does not mean. Okay, several people think of atheism as devil worshippers, Satanists, followers of some alternative movement to destroy religion, that they might be into Wicca or otherwise deemed witches. We've also got the idea that clearly atheists are mentally unstable and want to destroy all government and religious entities and are anarchists at heart. This is not part of the definition of an atheist. An atheist does not directly, many atheists, some atheists do, but many atheists do not necessarily hold ill feelings towards those who are religious, nor do they have an active desire to destroy all religion. Okay, so that is, I think, a misnomer. They're no more likely to be a criminal or behave immorally by doing bad things or immoral things than somebody who would belong to a religious particular faith. Okay, so they are very similar to everybody else. You don't know by looking at them or how they act that they're an atheist. So here again, atheists do not hate God because there is no God to hate. See, that's like the paradox there. They don't hate somebody or something because from their point of view, that something or entity or belief system is fake. So there's no reason to have ill feelings towards God. And there are those Christians or those Muslims or Hindus who actually have resentment towards God. They're angry that God has not met their needs or has given them that which they cannot handle or has otherwise not lived up to their expectations, and they're angry at God. That is not an atheist. An atheist has no anger because there is nothing to be angry about. Okay? Likewise, they don't hate people who believe in God. They might think those who are believers are stupid. They might think that they're all confused, but there is not this feeling of anger or hatred or animosity. So what do Americans think of atheists? What do you think? Do we like them in America? No! We do not like atheists as a country. As a country, we're founded on Christianity. We have religion out of our entities, but it's everywhere. Even ask people who are non-Christian what the Ten Commandments are. And I do this in my classes, and I'll divide the Christians and the non-Christians, and I'll send the Christians outside to purgatory, and I'll keep the non-Christians inside, and I'll have them come up with a list of 10 Commandments. And you know what? There's a whole bunch of Christians who don't know the 10 Commandments, and there's surprisingly high numbers of non-Christians who can rattle off 5 or 6 of them. Don't kill, there's something about don't say the word God in vain. They can whip them out even though they're non-believers. So my point is, we have this idea here that the atheists are bad, Most people would not want an atheist as their politician. They don't want atheists around their kids. They don't want an atheist, they're worried that an atheist is going to somehow do something bad to them. There was a study where we ranked views of religion, and atheists only scored slightly above Americans' views of Muslims. And right now in our country, at the time of this survey, Muslims ranked, at a 45 percentile ranking for acceptance of Muslims in our country. So atheists were like 48, okay, barely above our view of Muslims at that time in the history of that survey. We don't want atheists running our world. We're afraid of them. When we think of atheists, this is what a lot of people think atheism must be like. If you don't believe in a creator, if you don't believe in an entity, if you don't have spirituality, then clearly atheists must be lacking. They must be so sad. They must have no meaning in their life. How could you possibly have meaning? They have no meaning in their life, and it's empty, and it's just a loss. Many people regard atheists as cynical and critical and angry and sassy and just, unhappy people. Again, the nonconformist, anarchist, people who want to disrupt everything, those are the atheists. But the data tells a completely different story. The data suggests that atheists do not lack meaning in their life. They are not depressed, sad, unhappy, full of angst. In fact, those atheists that are convicted in their thought that there isn't a God, you're all crazy. And I feel strongly that this is how I feel. They are extremely happy. Very happy, elevated levels of well-being. The strength of their conviction is as strong as a strength of conviction in a higher power. That strength of conviction is protective, and they are happy. In keeping with Amy's study, I don't know if you I picked up on it when she was talking about her groups of people and how many Catholics and Christian and other groups. I want to say she said that there were 4% who identified as none. That is very similar with the number of Americans who will self-report as being atheists. But nuns are on the rise. Pew Research Center did a study about atheism and religion in general and trying to figure out what the numbers are and where we're going. And they haven't done the study for very long. In 2007 is when they started polling this. And the title of the article that I grabbed this from was simply Nuns Are on the Rise. The fastest growing religious group in the United States, or religious faith, is none. The non-affiliated or the self-proclaimed atheists. And here we have 1/5 of the US and 1/3 of adults are religiously unaffiliated. This is a huge shift in our culture. Huge shift sociologically. Go back, 50 to 100 years. We have religious freedom, but you're Christian, right? Like that was an expectation. You better have a cross in your house. You better have the Bible. We didn't have access to a ton of reading material. So the good book was